other money-making ventures as Goldman Sachs, where he was a partner, or Fortress Investment Group, the hedge fund and private equity firm he co-founded and which was the first to go public on the stock exchange. Mike had a little bit of a rough patch running a macro fund over at Fortress, so he left a couple of years ago. But man, the dude has bounced back. His personal trading in Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, as they're called, over the past 2 years netted him something like $250 million, biggest trade of his career. Now he's starting a $500 million hedge fund that will invest in what he tells me is going to be a new asset class for the world's biggest fund managers. We discussed his enthusiasm for Bitcoin, initial coin offerings, and some other stuff when he swung by Times Square. But that's not all. Did you know Mike financed Birth of a Nation, the movie about the Nate Turner slave rebellion? We also got into politics and wrestling, not necessarily in that order. Give a listen to my chat with Mike Novogratz. Okay, so Mike, you've created quite a few headlines over the past couple of weeks and months over your investments in Bitcoin. You've created a $500 million hedge fund, Galaxy Digital Assets Fund, to invest in cryptocurrencies. Meantime, a lot of folks here on Wall Street, Jamie Dimon among them, think cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin is something like the Amsterdam tulip boom. But you've made money off of it. How do you look at this?
I think if you dig in and do the work, Bitcoin, the blockchain, which is the technology Bitcoin is built on, the whole cryptocurrency revolution is real. To start off, it was an amazing technological breakthrough. To kind of simplify it, Satoshi or whoever Satoshi was, really the genius of it was the first electronic thing that you couldn't counterfeit.
Right.
And therefore you couldn't pay it out twice. If I have something on a blockchain and I sell it to you or I give it to you, it's no longer mine, it's yours.
Right.
And that sounds simple, but that was an amazing...
Well, there's a real purity to it, right?
A real purity to it. And there's a networking effect. As more people get involved, the system gets stronger. There's also this effect that because people who are participating own it, they have the incentive to do good. I just spent 2 hours at Bank of America talking to 15 of their most senior people, trying to educate them on Bitcoin. And in some sense, that's philanthropic time. The other sense, it's not at all. I own a lot of Bitcoin, and I'd love Bank of America to get
wider adoption by one of the world's biggest banks would be a huge shot in the arm for...
Of course. And so everyone in the community, in the system, has an incentive to be a good participant. Listen, the digital revolution is about a lot more than Bitcoin. It's at its core, it's a decentralized revolution. And it stemmed from the fact that after '08, people started losing trust in institutions, trust in banks, trust in governments. And, there's a real radical core to this.
Right.
There's a different way to do business. And you're now seeing it. You're seeing young people flock to the blockchain space. I'm seeing cool, disruptive businesses in almost every vertical. And each of these businesses is like its own ecosystem. And so there'll be a coin for online gambling. There'll be a coin for digitalized ride sharing.
Right.
And, some
different currencies for different realms.
For different realms.
Yeah.
And they're not even really currencies.
Right.
They're like, because I don't think we're going to not use the dollar.
Stores of value.
They're stores of value, and they become access to these ecosystems where the ownership gets spread out. And so it's pretty radical.
So how do you've made, talk to me, you made like a ton of money.
I made lots of money.
How did you do that?
Part of that is having money to start. And so, my first bet, while it was a small amount of money as a percentage of what I owned, it was still a large amount of money for most people. And so, I bought Bitcoin way back when it was $100, and I bought Ethereum when it was at $1. Bitcoin's now kind of split adjusted at close to $8,000, and so it's 80 times, and Ethereum's at 300, and so that's 300 times your money.
Right.
And so you don't have to be a genius if you buy things that early. Right. Now it was hard holding on to them because
how did you not sell when you get to 100 times?
I sold some. I just bought enough that I could sell some and sell some, and then all of a sudden you have this amazing, stupid concept, but it works, of the house's money. Like that, money is just money. There's no such thing as the house's money.
Right.
We fool our brain into saying, well, I'm playing with the house's money and I'm letting it ride.
Right.
What I learned as a macroeconomic investor is great fortunes are made in trend. right? They're made in trend.
Right.
All the great fortunes in the world are made in trend. There's very few people that are counter-trend investors that make great fortunes.
Right, right.
Bill Gates bought Microsoft, it just kept going up.
Right, right.
So Jeff Bezos, richest man in the world, solely because of Amazon.
Right.
Amazon's been
Or
a trend.
owning bonds over 30.
Yes, yes. And so, learning that as a macro guy and kind of handcuffing yourself to the chair and holding on to some of this stuff. You have to put metrics around it. So Bitcoin, my belief is its use case is just digital gold. It is a store of value for the new era. And it's hard for a 60-year-old to understand, like, why would anyone want to own Bitcoin when they could own gold?
Right.
Yeah, but my 16-year-old, he lives in his phone. His life is digital. And so it's it's an easier jump. And it's got the same principles. There's a limited amount of Bitcoin. There's a limited amount of gold. It's becoming a store of value.
No, I get that, but if you use gold as the analogy, gold didn't just keep going up forever and ever. It's gone up, it's crashed, it's come down. It's not, if you'd owned gold over the last 30 years, I don't think you'd be doing well.
And a Bitcoin will go up, it will go back down.
We had a 30%, nearly a third down, like in last week, right? So.
And so, to me, that's why it won't be a currency. Currencies need stability. Currencies, dollar yen, I traded it for 30 years. It's plus or minus 10%. And at one point, my wife asked me, she says, why do you spend so much of your time worried about dollar yen? Like, it barely moves. And I was like, good point. We were pretty levered. But until, Bitcoin would reach some equilibrium price, which I don't think it will, it won't be a currency.
Right.
But it could be historical. Gold's got an $8 trillion market cap, somewhere around $8 trillion, and Bitcoin's got a $125 billion market cap. And so there's a long way to go. Another stat I would tell you is that there are roughly, 15 or 20 million Bitcoin wallets or crypto wallets out there. About half of those are really active. So call it 10 million, 12 million. Sure. There are 400 million people that buy and or sell digital swords, helmets, jackets, cloaks to play video games. They're called skins.
Okay.
Listen, there's 400 million people that participate in the skin market.
So if they could put some skin in the game, as it were, with the currency.
Well, as they shift to Bitcoin, the world is becoming digital. And when you buy a fancy sword, it doesn't even help you in the game. It's just your fashion when you're playing the game.
Really?
Think about that. Okay. So they're expressing their creativity, they're expressing their fashion in a digital world.
Right.
And there's not a direct analogy to Bitcoin, but it's the sense that as the world gets more comfortable with digital stuff, they're going to get more comfortable with digital
There'll be wider
gold.
adoption of it in some way. What's the fund? How are you structuring the fund?
It's going to be a macro. Ironically, I got out of the macro business. I'm right back in it. A macro hedge fund that's going to buy and sell Ethereum, Bitcoin, probably the 25 biggest coins.
So you are taking directional bets on these.
We're taking directional bets.
You can't really short it or hedge it.
We found ways to short it. It's challenging. You got to borrow coins from other people, but there are people out there that will lend you coins, and then you can short it, and then you can get some leverage that way. Right now, there's a big enough tailwind that I think the fund is going to be kind of 65 beta to the market. And so it's going to be a ride. We'll run it at 45 or 50 or 60 vol. Most macro funds run at 10 vol.
Right.
And so people are putting a little less money than they put in a macro fund because you're getting 5 times the risk.
Right.
Where
are you? You're not. I imagine these are not university endowments and pension funds.
Not yet, but they're coming. Interesting.
You think?
I have sat with. I'm not necessarily maybe in our fund, but I've sat with some of the biggest pension funds in the world recently, and done the tutorial, and they've showed up with 8 analysts who have done their work, and they are stone cold serious about looking at this as an asset class. You put 1% of your fund in it, like if it triples, or goes up 8x, you feel pretty good, and the worst you can lose is 1%. If you think about how we think about equities, when you're doing an equity portfolio, it's a 1% position, 2% position, and so if you get that shift, and I see it coming, it's a tremendous amount of money into the market.
Right. And what kinds of things will you invest in? Will it be ICOs? Or how does that work?
In this fund, we're not doing ICOs. Okay. I'm investing in ICOs with my own money still. But for a bunch of reasons, we decided to keep this fund a little simpler. So we're going to do coins once they have enough liquidity to match a liquidity test of ours. So trading $50 million a day. The ICO market still has a lot of regulatory hair around it. Matter of fact, there's been some ICOs that have I've invested in where I've sent money and wouldn't even sign the docs because I was like, the docs are so loaded against the investor in this one.
I bet.
I know the guy doing it. I've called him up and told him, if you take my money, I'm going to hit you with a baseball bat.
Yeah.
And so I kind of trust the guys there.
Right.
But I wouldn't want to do that with investors' money at this point.
Right.
And so...
I mean, it's a sort of, it's an unregulated gray area with a fair amount of opportunity for fraud and
there are
bad behavior.
There are. I was going to point out a fraud today publicly, and my lawyer asked me to wait a little bit, and so I didn't. But like we look pretty closely. There are some frauds. I gave a speech recently in San Francisco and was saying, hey, it's the community's duty to do good things because those are the positive reinforcement loops, and the bad things hurt the overall system. And whenever there's this kind of a tailwind, right, you've got an angel on one shoulder and a devil on the other shoulder, just like an Animal House.
Right.
And it's tempting to do, to take the shortcut and you're seeing not a lot of it, but you're seeing some of it. At the core of this, though, the Bitcoin core developers, the Ethereum founders and core developers, these guys are stone cold serious. They're in it for the right reasons. They see this as a revolution, as a new way to structure business. And so, this is not built on fraud by any stretch.
Right. Well, look, I mean, the railroads, the silver mines, you go back, I mean, fraud is a thing that happens in emerging markets, as it were. So, but this one is, it's still very much emerging.
Yes.
And so you have to be careful. How's the fund structure? Are you like a 2 and 20 hedge fund?
It's a 2 and 20 hedge fund.
Okay.
It's going to be quarterly liquidity after it gets locked up for a year. We're going to try to stay liquid. A lot of the funds feel more like venture capital funds. We're doing venture ourselves, but not in this fund.
So in venture, the picks and shovel guys, the companies that are doing...
You buy the companies.
The blockchain.
Venture is a 5-year bet. And maybe in this space it's a 3-year bet, but it's a 5-year bet. And we didn't feel like that was appropriate for a liquid hedge fund.
Right.
And so this is kind of the most kind of... Well, the only simpler offering would be just, hey, we'll buy Bitcoin for you or buy Ethereum for you. And there's plenty of people that are doing that. It's still relatively difficult to buy for people. You got to set up a wallet on Coinbase or Gemini.
Yep.
And, so there's a lot of people working at trying to make that easier.
Yeah.
I think the moment you can pick up and call your Fidelity rep and say, hey, just buy some Bitcoin for me, you'll have a lot new customers and the price will go a lot higher. And I think that's coming. I think that's coming soon.
Yeah.
I know,
notwithstanding people like Jamie Dimon calling it, sort of some fraudulent dark zone.
I can be somewhat sympathetic to big traditional hedge funds, banks. They have giant franchises that they want to protect. And why would they take any risk when you have the money printing franchise?
And they have, a government guarantee at the end.
They also are, at their core, they're rent takers.
Yeah.
And it's a good business to be a rent taker. The spirit of this revolution is to go after the rent takers. Mm-hmm. Like Uber is a rent taker. They're going to take 25% of every ride that they can. The spirit of the decentralized Uber will be go after the rent taker, and the user of the token will be the owner of the company.
Right.
And so, I laugh sometimes as a rich guy. In some ways, the spirit of this whole revolution is going after the rich guy, because rich guys make their money as rent takers.
Yes, no, but the new fortunes are created by those who create a whole new market or get in the middle of established order. Yeah. Speaking of which, you have an interesting career. You started. I mean, you were at Goldman Sachs the ultimate rent taker, shall we say, and on the bond trading business, which is another. You're in the middle. You're taking from one and giving to the other, and taking in with both hands. But you were one of the co-founders of Fortress. Do all your old Wall Street cronies? Do they think, man, what's going on with you, Mike?
I think most are watching with amusement, and more are getting involved. Most of my friends have done well enough that they're experiencing a little bit of FOMO,
right?
But not a lot, because they still have their own.
They're still doing fine.
They're doing fine. Yeah. They're doing fine. Though, I'm seeing more and more get involved, not with their institutions, but with their own money.
Right.
Just want to have a bet on the table. And I think people are pretty excited about the space. The banks are starting to do these meetings. I think it'll be a while before Bank of America gets involved.
Sure.
But they're doing the meetings to try to understand is there a way they participate. Yeah. Other banks, I think, will be there much sooner than them.
Right.
Lloyd Blankfein has been pretty open about a willingness to at least explore this thing and think, hey, of course this could work. Why
Sure,
not?
and Goldman, certainly, like all the banks, have taken big stakes in venture capital stakes in the blockchain,
Right.
or companies operating the blockchain, because they see that as a huge opportunity, mainly to create more efficiency in the sector. But the coins, the currencies, they seem to still be.
People make too big of a differentiation between Bitcoin and blockchain. Like, people love to think of those as completely separate things, and they're not. It's really, Bitcoin is built on blockchain technology, and it's one ecosystem. It's the ecosystem of, stored wealth, or maybe even money, if you want to think it could get there. I don't think it'll get to money. I think it'll be stored wealth.
Right.
But the ecosystem really is it's a shared database, a shared distributed ledger. And think of every company that has databases, where a shared database makes more sense, where no one's in control of it. One of the unique things is you can't erase it, you can't manipulate it. Once it's there, it's there. And so, the country of Georgia just announced they're going to put all land registry on the blockchain. That's pretty cool.
Right.
When Gaddafi, I've said this before, when Gaddafi took over Libya, he burned everyone's title, and said, I own it all.
Right. But if it's now on the
Now it's on the blockchain, when he gets
you can't
thrown
touch
out,
it.
he gets thrown out 30 years later. You're like, no, this is mine. It says it's right there.
Right.
I don't care if you took me, you pushed me off with your army. And so again, where trust gets broken, the blockchain really is an interesting panacea.
Yeah. No, can I ask, just stepping back, you seem to have a very strong appetite for risk, and it's served you extremely well. How did you develop that, or where did it come from?
I think it's partly in my DNA, and it's partly, I was born into a big, rambunctious Catholic family of 7. My dad was in the Army, so we didn't have a whole lot of money. And my first job out of college was flying helicopters in the Army. And I tell you what,
there's no risk in that.
I had just as much fun living on $18,000 after tax per year in Dothan, Alabama, as I did as a millionaire. And I think the knowledge of that, or the awareness of that, allows you to not care so much about the money. Listen, at Fortress, we made billions and we lost billions, and while my life changed in some ways, certainly, more responsibility, more stuff is more work, and more opportunity. At its core, I haven't been so scared of losing that. And I think that allows you to.
I suppose there's a big difference. Obviously, at Fortress, you were the first hedge fund to go public.
We were,
really, in the States. And so you had a whole other constituency that you had to think about, of course, which was investors. What do you think of those guys selling to SoftBank?
I think it's a really smart and strategic move. Masa-san is brilliant. They sold to the Vision Fund, which is a $100 billion fund. Wes and Pete are unique and brilliant investors in their own right. I think one of our mistakes at Fortress we made when we went back is, we had 3 very diverse businesses run by big personalities, and we never really got great at running the firm that way.
Right.
And, at SoftBank, they fold into a bigger infrastructure, and they can kind of do their own thing with the ability to access, almost unlimited capital. And so I think Masa probably looked at this as hiring, great human talent.
Yeah, it's kind of like a massive acqui-hire.
Yeah.
If you think about it, right?
And it gives them an exit, a graceful exit when they want to get out. My bet is Pete Brigger will be there a long time. He's an institutional guy at his core.
Now if in theory, if they're part of the $100 billion Vision Fund 1, and there are going to be other Vision funds, at least Masayoshi has said there will be, and I had the pleasure of speaking to the Crown Prince a couple of weeks ago in Saudi Arabia, and he said he'd back 2, 3, 4, 5, as long as he's still Crown Prince.
Yes,
but
as long as he's still Crown Prince.
Yeah. But after Fortress, you also did you invested in some movies, didn't you?
I did.
What was that like?
So, I invested in Birth of a Nation. My friend Nate Parker came to me, and he had this idea. And to be fair, he was down on to the last few weeks before he was going to lose his window to make a movie. All these movies are so difficult.
And that Birth of a Nation is the story of the Turner slave rebellion.
The Nat Turner slave rebellion. And I originally said, well, I don't know. And then he came back and made his case. And we drank a whole lot of Jack Daniels one night. And I said, all right, I'll do it. And, I called a few of my friends thinking, well, I would distribute some of the risk.
You were underwriting it.
And underwriting. And I remember Pete saying to me, he's like, listen, I have a lot more experience with you in movies. And investing in independent films is a really crappy business, and doing a black independent film is a really, really, think of it as philanthropy. And I was like, oh. And, Nate was like, dude, I'm going to win at this. And he was a wrestler. I was a wrestler. He would volunteered at...
That's the thing with you, wrestling.
Wrestling is a sport that
right.
you suffer in. And it's a tough sport. I've spent a lot of my life, in it or supporting it. And like to take care of the guys in it. And so I bet on Nate. He hit the long ball. He made an amazing, powerful movie. It was really...
It's a very powerful film.
It was really fun to sit next to him and watch him at Sundance. I literally watched him. I was like, that guy's going to be the senator one day. The way he dealt with the cast and crew, the way he dealt with the press, his spirit of the whole thing. And, it was... Did you
make any money?
We sold for more money than any independent film in history.
All right. Okay.
And so, it was also interesting how
But
things...
does that mean you made money?
So I made money,
Okay,
yes,
good.
I did. I made 2.5, 3 times my money. I could have made a lot more if the movie didn't get sidetracked.
It's not Bitcoin, but at least you get to influence the culture.
I tell you what, I left Fortress. Very few people leave Wall Street gracefully. And I left Fortress and it wasn't gracefully. My hedge fund screwed up.
Yeah.
I left, me, Pete, and Wes we're in a tough position, and Randy, to be fair. We all owned all our stock, but leaving early was unfair to the other guys. And so how do you square that circle? And so it was a painful process. And, it's nice to get a win under your belt. And so like 2 months later, I'm at Sundance having produced the best movie. And it was just that psychology of winning again that I needed. And so forget the money.
Well, you made a good film, so that felt
great.
That's useful for sure.
Yeah.
What about politics? I mean, you've been a backer of Democratic politics throughout your career. You obviously have seen some folks with means, like Tom Steyer, who obviously made his career in a hedge fund and has now gone out sort of full anti-Trump. But there's a lot of folks, that I talk to who are thoughtful, have means, aren't very happy with the direction of the country. What's your take? Are you going to do something in that realm?
I probably dislike Trump as much as Tom Steyer, in that it's not even all the policies I hate as much. It's just we've got a president for the first time, I think, in history with almost negative empathy and no moral leadership. I was up at West Point. My father's a West Point grad, and they asked me to come teach a class at West Point. It was a real honor. It was a ton of fun. And I was talking to these cadets, and I was like, on the one hand, you're supposed to follow orders. On the other hand, being a leader is about having your own sense of right and wrong. And you guys are in a really tough place because, my father had told me, he said, we've never had a commander-in-chief like this.
And you can, the politics or the policies, everyone can have a legitimate disagreement on, but there are some things like the golden rules of, that transcend
decent.
That. I think
just being decent and the extreme level of narcissism.
So what are you going to do about it? You got a plan?
It's the absurd. So listen,
with all this money you made of Bitcoin, there's got to be something you can do to.
Listen, today we announced, it was in the New York Times and a lot of places, a big initiative around bail. And so I'm chairing the bail project that we're calling it.
Right.
We've raised $30 million out of $60 million we're going to raise to just bail people out of jail. It is one of the biggest travesties in the criminal justice system that tonight 450,000 people will go to bed in a stinking rotten jail cell having been arrested but not convicted.
Right.
Most of these misdemeanors. $500 bail. People don't have the means. Remember, half of America can't afford a $500. Trump got elected because half of America can't afford a $500 dental bill, let alone bail. And so if you're black, brown, or poor white, you have a different justice system. Yeah. My cousin or my brother or your friend or anyone working on this floor, they wouldn't go to Rikers for trespassing.
No, that's right.
And so we've turned our criminal justice system into this kind of bizarre.
But that's very worthy philanthropy, but it doesn't necessarily, and it helps people, but it's not necessarily a political act.
Well, bailing someone out, I did it. I went up to the boat up in the Bronx. Have you ever not?
It's the one off by LaGuardia. You see, is that it?
This is in Hunts Point. It is a frickin' slave ship that they floated up from New Orleans 35 years ago as a temporary jail, and it serves to keep 950 people It's like Rikers for the Bronx.
Right, okay.
You walk up, you're like, does anybody not see this metaphor? It literally looks like a slave ship in the middle of, the harbor, sandwiched between the fish market, which they removed, they moved
up there, yeah,
and
Fulton.
and a sewage plant. So it either smells like shit or it smells like fish.
Right.
And you've got 900, black and brown guys shackled on a boat.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, this is a really nice image for 2017.
Yeah, the metaphor there does not look pretty.
And you go in and you try to bail a guy out, and they send faxes to Rikers, and you sit there until someone picks up the fax. The whole system is done with no thought to the dignity of the completely accused but not convicted citizen.
Sure.
And so you finally bail the guy out. You're like, all right, let's see who he is and get his story. Oh no, he won't get out for 9 more hours because they got to process him.
Right.
And they let him out when it's too late to get his collectibles. He's got to come back the next day. And so I was just thinking to myself, just the sheer act of bailing someone out is pretty damn political. It's a middle finger to the system. It says the system is broken.
Right.
And there's a lot of momentum in criminal justice reform. And then all of a sudden Trump puts in Jeff Sessions, and they're all pushing back the other direction. And so there's other things I'm doing politically, supporting different candidates that I think will help, and looking at organizations. Unfortunately, starting this big crypto business takes a whole lot of effort.
Yeah.
And so I'm pretty.
So it distracts you from the latest tweet or
I'm the chairman
outrage.
of the board of 4 separate organizations on the philanthropic side. I run the Hudson River Park, the Friends Group, which is political in a local fashion.
Right.
The wrestling charity.
Sure, you got your hands on.
And so my time is more valuable than my money at this point.
Right. Well, speaking of politics, we've got a big tax reform bill that may or may not make it through Congress. One of the things that's curious is that even though on the trail, the president said that carried interest would be one of his targets. Funny enough, it's not neither the Senate or the House. I mean, as a guy who's obviously done well off carried interest, what's your view on what should happen?
It felt to me in 2007 and 2008 when it first came up that carried interest should be taxed as income. I remember getting some fierce fights with some other more conservative friends. Mm-hmm. The politics interesting around it of partnership stuff is that the oil and gas industry is really where the bigger lobby on that comes from. Not even the hedge fund industry certainly pushes it, but because the oil and gas industry get caught up in it, that's where they get that whole group of congressmen and senators on their side. To me, it feels like
you also have it in some pharma areas. You've got it obviously in private equity,
but it just feels to me just in like a fairness thing. If I just said, "Is that income or capital gain?" I'd say it's income.
Right.
And so I know people will argue the other side of that. But even forgetting that back then, I was like, just look at the dynamics of the country and give them a bone here.
Right. Yeah, the optics on this one are pretty
horrific.
Yeah, but changing the law would be relatively good politics, one would think.
Yes, which is shocking.
It's not with the donor class.
There was a great conversation. I forgot the guy's name. Byron Ween has these lunches every summer. You get a couple lunches. Mm-hmm. They're wonderful to go to because you get from the 80-year-olds to the new hotshots on Wall Street, and you're sitting around a table, and there's a great discussion. And there was a guy talking to tax reform about 6 years ago, and he had dedicated 10 years of his life in D.C. to tax reform, and he came back after 10 years. He was a billionaire. He had retired. He said, I'm going to go get this tax reform done. 10 years, he came back. He said, it's impossible. The lobbying is so fierce in each group, and that you just make no progress.
Yeah.
And, the lobbying around this carried interest is pretty darn strong. Otherwise, it'd be in there.
That's right. Well, good. Thanks for coming by. Really appreciate it.
I appreciate it.